Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Feeding Curiosity. I'm your host, Eric Wenzel, as always. On today's episode, we're going to be covering something that is very near and dear to me, or something that I've cherished for a long time, and it's Spider-Man. But specifically, we're going to deep dive into the new film, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. And if you haven't watched the original one, I highly recommend you do that because it is a sequel. On top of that, if you're just a casual fan of Spider-Man through films, typically, this is going to be an awesome experience. Or at least my interpretation of these animated films has always been the truest sense of Spider-Man from the comics to Spider-Man to film. It captures the essence of it. And I bring that up very early on in this podcast. And just in general, Spider-Man is something for me that has stuck with me since I was about 5 years old. And so it's funny that this is taken this episode to really bring out that passion for me. But I guess it's kind of fitting that it is on this podcast because that's in some sense what the reason this exists. And so without further ado or rambling from me, because the whole point of this is to get to the conversation, but we get into breaking down this film. And I will say, as a preamble, but in general, there's been a lot of talk about fatigue in superhero films right now. And I don't know if there's fatigue for superhero films per se, considering the fact that most of these characters in the age of comic books have been around for the better part of 60 years. And they ebb and flow like any other thing, but yet they're still around and they still resonate with people. And I don't think it has anything to do with people being bored with them, but I think it's people telling compelling stories with them. And so when you see your next superhero film, try to understand what makes the character themselves compelling, not the bells and whistles and the fancy VFX, because that's supporting character more than anything. And so, anyways, please enjoy this deep dive into Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Alrighty, everyone, welcome back to Feeding Curiosity. We're back, and I actually am surprised we haven't really talked about Spider-Man as much as one might expect. But here we are. We're going to be talking about Spider-Verse. Or no, sorry. I keep wanting to call it Spider-Verse 2, because that's what it is technically, but it's, Jesus, and now I'm forgetting it. Across the Spider-Verse?
Yeah.
Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse? There we go. Nailed it. Horrible intro.
Yeah, the shorthand. It's all good. Shorthand.
And, I mean, first things I think is worth just seeding other people listening is to think about this movie in terms of what is like the essence of Spider-Man. Like, what are the core characteristics that make Spider-Man a compelling hero? Because the reason I say that is I think if other people are creating superhero-like content, this is a prime example for people to take notes to create actual compelling superhero films. Not just animation, but or compelling superhero stories in general. It doesn't have to be a movie or anything like that. Because there's not many that get this right as of right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree. I feel like they nail it in tone and everything, and just being original, I think, is the main thing. That it doesn't feel like it's just another movie to like fill wallets, like there's actually care put into it. And it comes through very effortlessly and clearly.
I think the art is a big part of it. It seemed to me to some degree, I mean, maybe this is just one section of the whole film, but that the aesthetics were in some ways a means of letting the animators show off. Like, it's almost like the whole premise to some degree is a means of showing us the ability, the technology. The fact that you've created a multiverse as part of the plot gives you near infinite freedom with the character designs, among other things, the world design. And say nothing of the way that they use this kind of color blocking throughout the film to elicit particular kind of vibe
Oh no, it's bleeding over.
Right.
That is an inside joke. We'll get to that maybe never, but
Right.
but we'll continue on. Yeah, I think Joe, to continue on with the art aspect, just kind of jumping off of like the very beginning of this, how this opens, it's actually different, right? Like you'd expect, if you watch the original Spider-Verse animated film, you'd expect this to pick up right where Miles leaves off, effectively, being Spider-Man Jr., kind of like, okay, he's proved himself. But instead they kind of do not a 180, but it's like a slight pivot with giving you more backstory into Gwen, or Spider-Gwen. In the comics, she's called Ghost Spider, but that it seems like they're getting rid of that and calling her Spider-Gwen again. I don't know what's going on with that character, but in any case, I think her story is cool, or at least they're doing a good enough job of like giving her a fleshed out backstory. But what I thought was really cool about what they did for her was giving the emotional tonality with how they did the art, with like watercolors and things like that. And you really see that with the scenes with her dad, and how the color is like bleeding, where like on one side of the screen it's her father and her, and like the colors are totally disassociated, where it's like one is blue, one is pink, and then it's only like when they hug at one point where like the colors start to bleed, like they're connecting again. Or like toward the end when he's saying the Miranda rights, which I'm jumping forward, so feel free to rewind. Then the colors start going to black and stuff like that, where it's like a huge disconnect.
There's definitely a piece there, like the whole scene with what was it, the vulture?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, there's this kind of was it the drawings of, was it Michelangelo or Da Vinci?
Yeah, it was
Kind of
Da Vinci, Michelangelo. Yeah.
Yeah, this look of kind of character design, that I don't know how quickly we want to jump into the deep philosophy on this, but I think that a lot of the
Joe, you're on this. It doesn't matter. We're already going to be in the deep end.
I mean, I think that my one complaint about the show is actually that I think that the multiverse has reached, the idea of a multiverse in art has reached its conclusion, that you can't take it any farther. And that you saw it sort of mastered as a plot device in Rick and Morty, who were really wrestling with the kind of the nihilism, and how that the nihilism of the culture right now, but representing that nihilism of the culture by creating an infinite number of universes that by statistics sort of render any experience meaningless. And so it was a strong plot device for that show, and it played with it a lot, and continues to play with it. But when Spider-Man does it, they take it to one more step, where things are in this kind of postmodern way so fractured that everything is so disconnected from everything else, that and no sort of embeddedness in or continuity even between these kind of different universes, that even the artwork dramatically changes between these places. The rules of the animation completely change. It could be 2D, 3D. It had what's his name playing live action, playing one of the villains,
Donald Glover.
Donald Glover.
Yes, thank you, Donald Glover. So all of the rules that make a single unity appear in the artwork are dissolved entirely, and I just don't think you can take it any farther at that point. And I part of me is this is why it's a bit of a complaint, is because I'm kind of tired with it, and that I'm at this place where I'm like, yes, we've done this, and yes, there's always these questions about meaning and whatever that come out of the multiverse, but I'm like, I miss a unity. I miss a feeling of this kind of melody. I mean, even melody in music is gone, and it becomes this technical. It's more about rhythm. It's like there's all this fracturing going on within our culture that this is the art style of this is an example of, that I am tired of.
Yeah, I can see that, because it is I say when you put it in a vacuum, like if you take this franchise story, because this is a sequel or part 2, whatever, um, it's fine, right? It works,
Right.
and there's no complaints. But it's just when you look at like how saturated Multiverse is across different franchises, it's like, oh
Yeah.
my god, it's the same thing. I think, and this is just I think you're speaking to something a little bigger. It's like a complaint of how art and sometimes artists work as a whole across mediums. Like you see this in music a lot, where like in hip hop specifically, there would be like a flow, right? Like a cadence rappers use, and it gets hot.
Mhm.
And then it's like every freaking song that comes out uses that cadence. And it's just because it's catchy, you know what I mean? People catch on to it
Yeah.
and it works. And so it's kind of a natural thing and it makes sense. But what happens with this specifically with the multiverse is I think you can cut corners in your storytelling. Kind of, Wenzel, you said this before, where it's like things just don't matter.
Mhm.
You can wash it away because, oh, we'll just go here, and then it rewrites everything. So I see that.
Yeah.
But with this, I was fine with it. And it doesn't hit me that way because it's a sequel to Into the Spider-Verse that came out, I think, before the wave of the
Yeah, 5 years
multiverse
ago,
really hit.
which is crazy to say.
Yeah, 2018, right?
Mhm.
So that's why this one still feels fresh to me. But I do get what you're saying. There's another show animated. It's called Invincible. I don't know if you guys seen
Mm.
that's on
I've
Amazon
heard it's
Prime.
really good. I haven't
Yeah,
watched it yet
good.
though.
Really good. It's great. But the sequel, or not sequel, the second season deals with the multiverse. It just came out and said,
Mm.
and I'm like, oh my god, I'm so tired of it. So I get what you're saying. It's like, like you know what I mean? But
And you can get yourself caught in this like that is the meaning problem with this kind of a thing, is that it does get to a place where it even ends up destroying any of the weight of any moment whatsoever in the show you're watching, because now Marvel can resurrect whoever the fuck they want, whenever they want, because, oh, there's a multiverse. It ends up being this just catch-all Deus Ex Machina bullshit
Yeah.
that can really wreck with the constraints that are necessary to write a good story. You have to write something under like the pressure of the reality of the world that you're in. And if you create the world in such a way that doesn't put any pressure at all, then it's like, what the fuck is the environment? What even is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I can come at this from a completely different angle because this has been done in the comic books 3 times now. And now it's happening currently with Venom, the symbiote. So, and a lot of the comic book fans are also having the same reaction to not just like multiverse, but Spider-Verse in particular. Most people are bored of it in a sense that basically you take a brand and you start fracturing it like you're talking about, Joe, and you say, okay, well now Peter Parker doesn't matter. Or so like, and that's not to say that Peter Parker can't like be like, or rather Spider-Man can't be somebody else, but you start doing damage to a character because now all of a sudden it doesn't, like, you have no stakes as to who that character is, right? Like you've dissolved the boundaries around all of this, and then you just start watering it down, and it's a danger in that sense that I am worried about. And that's kind of one of the things that I really enjoy about how they're doing this animated series, in a sense that they're fleshing out backstories of both Miles and Gwen to give them a better like foundation. But that doesn't preclude that there is still the issue of a multiverse thing. And and going back to like the broader sense of this, I think we've been spoiled from good attempts at multiverse, at least in film, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, which you've talked about. And it's like once you do it well once, it's hard to live up to that standard. and now, and like Jordan, I do agree that in this scenario, Spider-Man pulls it off well. I do have a gripe in like within how the story is structured here that we can get into later on. It's minor, but I think it's part of that kind of like lazy writing thing, and kind of goes back to what I opened this conversation with: is what is the essence of Spider-Man as a mythological character? And so that's kind of a long-winded way of like, we're just tired of multiverses in the current year 2023. Like we've been bombarded by it over the last 2 years, 3 years maybe now. And I think the trope, you know, that well has gone dry, like you said. It's no more.
Yeah. I'm not even phenomenologically, I'm bored with it. Like the internet is a multiverse. Okay, you are just your attention hopping between these worlds with vastly different opinions that do all kinds of wild things and all behave in their own particular rules. And there's the total discontinuity on the internet. And it's like, so I'm doing this every day when I'm hopping from Facebook to Instagram to a scientific paper, to Reddit, where my attention is flickering and there's a complete there is no relationship between Reddit and Instagram or whatever, or a scientific paper. These things, there's no transition. It's all jump cuts. It's like, this is the whole experience that I'm getting on the internet already. And then I go into a movie theater and I get more of the same thing. I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, that is interesting. I do think this film does pull it off well, because we'll get into it when we start breaking it down. I feel like they follow a set of rules that obviously make sense in this world, but it's not like, it doesn't feel lackluster, right? And I guess we can get into the specifics a little later, but again, I feel like since this was a bit ahead of the oversaturation of it, I kind of look at this separate than like if new things start coming out and being like, oh, now we're going to deal with this. You know what I mean? Especially if they didn't previously establish that was something they were dealing with, right? Mm-hmm. This is fine because it's a closed loop story told through 3 chapters, essentially. It'd be weird if in the 3rd movie they're like, all right, we're done with the multiverse because consumers are tired of it. It'd be like, well, okay, now you have to, you got in it, you got to finish it now. So, but I think it's an issue more of how the business of art works as a whole than, to me, and this is coming from me who, wants to work in this industry. You know what I mean? Like, I can just see that versus me focusing on the individual creators of whatever that story, whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like, I don't look at something like Everything Everywhere, which was phenomenal, and say, I'm tired of this trope. Right. Because they did it so well. I don't look at Spider-Verse and that way, but like the totality of like, all right, when are we going to break out of this like loop we're stuck in, that everything supernatural has to deal with the multiverse right now? So,
yeah, this is, I totally agree on this. And I don't want it to sound like everything that I'm saying about this movie is horrible because I'm going to complain about some foundational mock device. It's like, this is the complaint, and everything else about the movie I like. So, but you can see it too. It's like, we're at the place where we really are. I think you're totally right that we're right on the edge. You could almost maybe push one more movie out of this, and then you gotta take me out of it. How do you escape the multiverse? Like, if the last movie this is going to be a trilogy, right?
Yeah,
is that going to work? So the last movie in this trilogy, they find a way to tie in poetically the closing of the multiverse. And now maybe we just follow Miles Morales or we just follow Gwen Stacy. That would be so satisfying because it's like, okay, and that chapter of our culture is over. We can leave that off to the side. We found a way out of the wilderness into promised land, right? Like, take me somewhere higher here. And
I got speculations on this front. I'm so excited to get into it at the end.
For the end.
I know we'll save it for the end, but I'm glad you're bringing it up to sprinkle in little nuggets here. But yeah, just as a last point too, it's like this gripe of the multiverse thing. Like, yeah, it's we're tired of it as like an audience, but at the same time, like the business of creating these things get locked in. 3 to 5 years. Like, I'm assuming these guys probably already knew a sequel's coming after the first year of the animation being done for the first film and people being like, oh shit, this is dope. And then they started thinking like, well, what else could we do? And, here we are 5 years later. And now all of a sudden it became a multiverse type thing over the last, so it's not a fault to the art. It's just a fault of how long it takes to produce art. Or produce something meaningful rather than just because they could have come out with something in 2 years or whatever and it could have been garbage. But I think they actually kind of going back to I personally, what blew me away even just from the opener was like, oh wait, they didn't just do more of the same, like stick within the guidelines that they showed with the first film. but they actually tried to challenge themselves again and say, okay, how do we iterate on what we did? Basically animating comic book styled art, but then on top of that, instead of just being like still images animating from it, and also kind of pushing Hollywood away from everything animated looks like Pixar, right? Everything's super sterile, super clean, very rounded edges. And now this comic style is so different. It's harder edges. Even in this one, you'll see it like in the opening sequence when Gwen meets Miguel for the first time. You actually see like the color lines around his shoulders because he's got like a more athletic, muscular build. It's like not even perfect. Like you'll see like a pencil line coming up and out, like super jagged. But like every frame, it's like moving slightly. So they try to keep like artistic imperfections in the character design that add more. It's like for those people who are used to imagining comic books, they just tried to like turn it into a flip book in some sense.
That is really cool. I didn't really notice that specifically, but that's tight.
This is a person who's read many, 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 many comic books.
Yeah.
In the aesthetic of it. And you can see the character design is probably the most obvious place where they just got to go a little buck wild and make up whatever they wanted. There's some wild, ridiculous things. I think that the way that they do what they really do right, besides, I mean, even though I'm complaining about the fractured nature of the animation, it's beautiful. It's there, like I don't know how you could do that any better, but I think that the way they kind of start to get around this, and I'm really hoping that this is signifying a trend here, is that in all the kind of fractured world and plot and nature and design, what you have is continuity of characters. They actually put real emphasis on the relationships between people in these circumstances. And I think it really, really shows when you see Gwen Stacy with her dad. I think that kind of, because the temptation in the culture right now would be for it not to be actually good. Like, would be to have there are very few good father figures that emerge in the arts right now. So that it's like the culture's bending. It's trying to put its finger on this and say, you can do this. You can make him a bad father, but they don't do it. They have a real relationship between her and her dad, and she relies on him, and it's good. It's a good relationship. And so it's like, okay, in all the chaos, what matters? The people you love. Yes, you got it. That's the thing.
Yeah. I think you're spot on with that one, especially because in terms of like looking at what makes like a Spider-Man as a superhero is typically it's the weight or the burden of the responsibility you carry as the superhero who can't tell those closest to them because fear of them getting hurt because of the decisions you make, right? Taking ownership of those things. And in Gwen's case, because her dad is a police officer, right? I think they do a really good job of setting up these parallel tracks with all these characters, or at least their core characters, specifically Miles and Gwen, giving them similar enough characteristics, but they're still uniquely set up that makes them feel not derivative of each other. In that sense, it feels awesome. Like showing her struggle, like opening the hard opener, I guess, of this movie is her, dealing with feeling lost and alone and not knowing or not really even having an outlet for, oh, by the way, I'm Spider-Man. Want to be friends? Like, I don't know how you, and then knowing there's people out there, but that you can't connect with those people. Right. And I think that's where a lot of this stuff transcends the boundaries for a lot of people, because everybody can relate to that feeling of feeling like you don't relate to anybody. And then there are like, you have that one friend that you just can't call for whatever reason. And that's like the premise of this story. And then she goes to save the day like she's supposed to. And it finds out it's like, hey, here's the portal to the other worlds that you were hoping for. And then she has that crossroads, right? Like we were saying with like the dad who's bad or whatever, or it's not even that. It's like just a disconnect where he falls into the responsibility thing, which is what she's falling into at the same time. And then they split he can't be dad. He's police officer.
Yeah. That part is interesting. It's like he was stuck
Yeah.
with his like moral, which is they're in the same place, they're in the same boat, right? They're both trying to do what's right. And he viewed who he believes Spider Woman, Gwen, whatever her name was.
Yep.
As this, he's been chasing her. That's his like goal. That's all his ambition for however long it was. So then he like can't just let go of that because he's like, this is what I'm supposed to do. She's a criminal. He believes she killed that version of Peter.
Yeah.
But then it's like, but would my daughter do that? Like, so it's just like that crossroads where he's like, I still have my duty. I can't let my relationship get in the way. Which is exactly what she's afraid of. Right.
Yeah.
It's quick and I like that they didn't spend too much time there. When I was watching, I was like, I hope this isn't like an hour. Not that I didn't appreciate the story,
half
but
the movie's going to be that.
Right. And then they go back to Miles. I'm like, if they did, they didn't. But I'm like, if they did, I would just like this to be a Spider-Woman story. Not, let's show you this, and then we're going to switch back to Miles, but we cut half the movie to tell you this story. It's like they got the point across, set up the stakes, showed her, Rick, and then kept it moving. And I was like, perfect. That's all you needed. It was like 20, 30 minutes, maybe something like that. But
yeah, maybe 30 minutes at most.
Yeah.
And then it cuts to Miles. And I think, honestly, like going back to what you were saying with like the multiverse part of this being over, or at least let's pull it back from that. I would even love just to see a full on Miles Morales style, like animated movie, just with like that for like the next 45 minutes where he's kind of like, I've grown up a bit. And then he's like fighting his villain of the week, which I think they set up the Spot as a villain great because it even subverted my expectations. Because in most superhero things, you expect, the warm up bad guy, whoever it is, like the useless, C tier villain who the hero beats up to just prove that, hey, he's got the chops. But in this one, they didn't do that, even though I thought they were going to do that because they kind of set it up as like, oh, it's kind of goofy and silly. And then it escalates from there. But it also did a good job, in my opinion, of showing like the other issues. And this is where I think the story itself operates at multiple levels, not just like this is a superhero film, but it's also a growing, like coming of age story, but not only for like children, but also for parents, because they spend a lot of time with Miles's parents. It's like, are we messing this up? Like, we don't understand our kid. Like, why we can't connect with him, or he's not telling us something and all that, right? Like, what's his future going to be like? And they're worried naturally, right? It's like a parent's thing. And I think it's such a refreshing take because I feel like there's a lot of, in other storytelling right now, we see a lot of like parents versus children or authority figures versus non-authority figures. And it's always just like contention, like butting heads, and nobody is looking for like resolution or like growing beyond whatever the conflict is, I guess.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. I hadn't really thought about their relationship a whole bunch, but as you talk about it now, I'm like, oh yeah, it's refreshing. It's it's not like it's this groundbreaking thing. It's like nobody's ever seen this before, but it's just like, that's refreshing. It's just down to earth.
Yeah, it's super relatable. And like even when he's in the room with like the counselor talking about like, oh, what school do you want to go? And he goes like, well, I want to go do nuclear fission or whatever, like quantum something in Jersey. And his mom's like, Jersey, like that felt like a real reaction that a mom who lives in Brooklyn all her life and would have.
Right. That whole like dialogue banter between them all. And that scene was hilarious. He's like, Jersey's too far from New York. Like, I mean? I was like, dude, this is hilarious. But to go off what you're saying too, it's refreshing, right? And it's relatable. But what I took from it too, and this goes deeper, but kind of in the representation aspect, which I think is a big thing that this movie does, and was one of the coolest things I noticed. So just a little side note, but like leaving the theater, I just saw a whole bunch of like little kids, like, Black kids and stuff, like all dressed up, just like super excited. And I'm like, that is what representation does. And I'm like, that's amazing to be able to participate in something like that, right? To see, I mean, it's animated, but to still like be able to see yourself in something.
Yeah.
Dope. But what they did when you come to the relationship with the parents, there's a lot of times when you see like a coming of age story about a young black kid, it's usually like a fractured home, right? But they didn't do that. It's like still loving and supportive, even though there's like the angsty, not exactly angst, but like not knowing what's going on. It's still just like full of support. And I'm like, that could rewrite the narrative. You know what I mean? Because it's not always fractured homes and like someone's in jail or something. It's not always that. It's much more nuanced. And to show that in this way, I'm just like, perfect. You know what I mean?
Like even with his dad's promotion, when they have like the party on the rooftop and like his wife, Rio, has the microphone, he's like, you don't get microphone privileges anymore. Like the silliness of like just people, like it just felt real. I don't know how to describe it other than saying that. Like it didn't feel like hacky, like they were trying to pretend it was like too idyllic. It just felt like parents trying to do their best, whatever that meant, you know?
100%.
Along with the cultural undertones. I thought the cultural, like making it feel like, obviously Miles is mixed. He's, I believe, Puerto Rican. He's Puerto Rican and half an African American. So it really felt like you really felt a lot of that cultural like vibe to go back to it again.
I want to know if the writers were from New York, because that scene in particular of being on the rooftop and like having a barbecue and everything, that felt to me like, and it's been very long in New York, but that it felt similar.
Really? Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah. Or you'd have parties. It was like a Wednesday night, and you hear partying out in the streets and people setting off fireworks. Right. I don't know if I live in this neighborhood, but like it's alive, right? There's a lot happening. There's this kind of whole boisterous, crazy, whatever.
That's
it is,
cool.
New York there that I felt in that scene.
Yeah. I wonder if they were. I just like I've recently watched the show. I won't say which one it is because I have nothing good to say about it. So I'll just leave it there. But I watched the show and they dealt with kind of the kind of Spanglish kind of aspect, you know what I mean? And it was so awfully. I was like, dude, no, that's not. I was like, this is. You can tell it's someone who doesn't speak Spanish who knows like a few words that just knew how to like plug in Ideos Mio or something like that. You know what I mean?
Oh,
it's
no.
like there is awful. But with this, I'm like, okay, clearly, if they don't speak Spanish, they nailed it. So whatever they did, keep doing it because
like
his
mom's reaction of like, you gotta be in Spanish.
Yeah.
And his dad's like, oh no, you're gonna get it later.
Right. It's so good.
And they're able to track all the characters well.
Yes.
Like nobody who shouldn't be falls into the background. Like all the characters are well fleshed out. There's a personality to each one. They're unique individuals, and they aren't used as, or at least too obviously, are reduced down to a plot device at any point.
Mm-hmm.
Like the even characters that are behaving like a like Gwen's father who's supposed to die or whatever. Like even if he's being used in some way as a plot device, he's at no point do you think that that's all that he's there for. Like there's still a real relationship between him and his daughter. It works throughout the whole movie. And so it's like another big plus for its focus on the characters and how they're able to interweave them into a nice web of
Yeah.
And then do we have anything else to say before Gwen shows up in Miles's world again, unannounced?
No,
because it's mostly just Spot kind of doing his thing, getting a little bit powerful, and then he has his kind of little breakthrough. But then, in an ironic sense, this is another like one thing I will say about the Spot is like the Spot is kind of a weird character, and in most of Spider-Man prior to this version of him, he's kind of a C-list character. Like he's really not that interesting. But in the context of like this multiverse thing, he can become more interesting because he can be kind of this tether that connects things together because he's getting more powerful by jumping through different universes. But it's like this idea of Miles calling him villain of the week and like not taking him seriously that triggers the villain to become the villain, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty cool way of like actually setting up the stakes in this instead of just the typical, oh, well, he's the villain and he's trying to do something bad to the world or whatever. It's like, nope, you said the wrong thing to the wrong person and now look what you caused.
No.
And he only works in a multiverse world, like that villain. Because my understanding is that the Spot doesn't have like interdimensional whatever magic shit he's getting.
In most versions of him, no, it's more of like teleportation where he can like kind of teleport short distances and stuff like that.
So that's really cool because they took the idea that the Spot is a character who just does this kind of teleportation, and then they asked themselves, well, what's the logic? How does he do it? What's this? And then they connect it to a multiverse and use the multiverse as an explanation for how he has the Spot in the first place. And so it's like, so they changed the metaphysic of the original character in order to, it makes it way more interesting. And then you can see his ascent as a character, not just as like in the way that I just described, but the character himself is ascending in power throughout the film that parallels the meaning of the work of the artist behind the scenes. And that's fucking cool.
And they think some people who've like done analysis of this character believe him to be kind of a representation of annihilation because he is like the black hole that will eat the multiverse effectively. If you let him do his thing, he will swallow everything.
That's interesting.
And Spider-Man is something that screams against the void that even if the end is inevitable, I will do everything in my power to make sure something remains.
Yeah.
Or at least that's what I think they're setting up to some degree.
Yeah. That makes sense. I had something I was going to say. I guess I could say it now, so I was going to hold it. But I feel like the theme between Miles and Spot are the same. That it's like they're kind of, because the story has like a lot of meta-ness to it, right? Where you have in real life when Miles was introduced, people were not happy about it, right? They're like, oh, this character, it's outside the canon. But then in the movie, it's the issue about the canon, right? I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but so it's kind of like they're speaking to the real audience who had an issue with it inside the film with the main antagonist in the film, right? And so you have Miles who's like trying to, in this meta sense, trying to substantiate himself and say like, no, my character does matter and this does work, right? And Spot is doing the same thing. Like, I'm not just villain of the week. I do matter. And then that's pushing him to become someone who you have to pay attention to. So it's kind of like their trajectory on this like meta scale is following the same path where it's like, at first, no, it don't matter. You know, this villain was pointless. And now it's like, oh shit. Okay, now we're going to pay attention to you. You know what I mean? Same thing's happening with Miles. But first, no, it doesn't matter. We don't care about that. Now you have this. And then people are calling it the best Spider-Man movie ever. Right? So it's like following the same trend. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, that is an interesting take. It's funny. It's like, I don't know. There's something Petersonian in there of like, be careful of like who you deride, because if they aim for the wrong thing, they can, like, you can either become a hero or you become the villain, right? It's almost like, or like, be careful what you pick as your ideal.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was it. I'll get it. We can get into it deeper when
we'll get there toward the end.
Yeah.
So let's talk about like Miles and Gwen reintroducing themselves, or I don't even know how to like describe it, because it's like, you know, Miles is grounded and then he's, you know, feeling angsty as all teenagers are because his parents grounded him because he's just failing on being a teenager at all fronts right now, even though he's Spider-Man. I just thought this sequence was so fun. And then this scene where they're on, oh my God, what is it called? It's like a famous building in New York.
Empire State? Was that it?
It might be. It's with the pinwheel where they're walking around the top, and then they do the inverted scene where it's the New York skyline as they're sitting on the, I forget the name of that building, but someone from New York will yell at us. or is yelling at us right now for "damn you" for not knowing New York.
Right. They can be upset all they want. They have the best pizza in the United States.
Damn right.
Oh, man.
Chicago represent.
Yeah, right. Jeez. It's not just deep dish, right? We don't only have deep dish. Just need to get that out there.
But yeah, just from like an artistic standpoint, again, I think like artistic, but also storytelling of like getting, like showing off like what Gwen is learning and how Miles is still kind of learned and is still willing to kind of like, he's trying to show off that he isn't just stagnating in some sense, even though he's just learning by his own. It was just such a cool moment to see. Like, it just felt like two friends who know that like life changes and they wish they could spend more time together. And it's like, you're the only person that gets me in the world kind of feeling, but like, you're not from this world. So it's like bittersweet.
Yeah. Sweet is what I was saying. I was like, it just, that whole moment was just sweet. I was like, this is just nice. Like rekindling. You could tell there's like a crush, but apprehension.
And nobody wants to say it.
Yeah. Just a sweet moment, you know?
And it works. And it's another example of how they did the relationships really well.
Mm-hmm.
And they took their time. How long was the movie?
2 hours or just over.
Yeah.
Like 2 hours and 10 minutes. I actually broke a record. I think it's the longest animated movie ever produced.
Okay, that sounds about right to me. Because I'm like, oh yeah, they really took their time. And as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I was in the movie theater for a while.
Yeah. But it's still well paced. Like it's long, but it doesn't feel like it drags at any point.
Yeah.
To me, at least, it did.
It's a necessary length. It's absolutely filled up with the lush relationships that they establish.
Yeah,
for sure. Solid.
Yeah.
But this is where the trouble in paradise begins shortly after this touching scene where Miles kind of... No, wait. There's the awkward scene with the parents. Hold on. We got to go back to that one. Because Gwen is supposed to be doing a job for the multiverse police, whatever you want to call them. The time police.
I thought they were most necessary as a plot piece than as an interesting moment between characters. Because there needed to be an explanation for the parents for why he was disappearing all the time.
Fair enough.
It wasn't that he so you kind of had to do that. And by introducing the girl, then it's like, oh, look, now we know what something doing.
It's the scapegoat. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't even catch that. But yeah, so Gwen and Miles are going back to the party, and his parents finally realize, oh, this is why Miles is acting weird. There's a girl involved. But immediately it's the mother who's prying into things. And they're also fixated on the fact that they don't like being called by their first names.
Yeah, which, fair enough. I'd get cringy with that. Growing up, it was always Mr. or Mrs., you know?
Yeah.
No, it's funny. Yeah, I mean, they just nailed these character moments really well. It's just light. It was fun. It's funnier than I thought it was going to be. But it was, just felt nice, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, not rushed. Made sense.
Right.
They didn't, like, lose the essence of the characters in these moments. Just worked.
Yep. And then from there, we realize Spot has escaped from Miles's dimension, and they finally find a place, and so there's a portal, and Gwen doesn't say goodbye to Miles. She's just gonna leave, even though Miles is right there because he's got like invisibility, and he followed her. And then they head to, I'm gonna butcher it. It's Mumbai, which is a like Indian version of New York City, effectively. And like Joe, this is where the jarring nature of the art probably, is I would say this is the most distinct shift from the art at this point in the film. Because beyond that, I don't think it's too crazy. But this entire sequence has the most distinct change.
Yeah, what was the when they
when they're in the Indian Spider-Man universe?
Oh, right. Yeah, that had they had the whole vibe, right? What they called like
Mumbai. Yeah, it's Mumbai, but it's
Manhattan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely started to get a sense of the like cultural flavors that they were willing to throw into the mix and how they wanted to play with it. The light was nice. They had this kind of watercolor is not what it is, but it looked almost watercolor, which was cool.
Mm-hmm.
I know what you mean. That was such a fun moment, dude. I think who comes in this world, but oh shit, what's it, Hobie?
Yeah, the Spider-Punk.
Yeah, he comes in later, but I think they were my favorite characters. It was just like, I don't know, they had fun with it at the same time. You know what I mean? Yeah, and like we said earlier,
it was even funnier when Hobie first joins, and then Miles' reaction is like, "Can anyone understand him?" Because he's talking in like a London slang, and then it like after he says, "Can anyone understand him?" it switches so you can actually understand him.
Oh, does it really?
Kind of, yeah. Like
really
the first few sentences he says are really slanged out, so you can't really like. It sounds like mumbling for us Yankees. But after that, it tones itself down a bit, so you can actually interpret him.
I didn't pick up on that. That's clever.
I watched the movie twice, so this is.
That's fun. There was this time when I was I was still in the Marine Corps. We were in the Gaslamp District in San Diego. And I was with Dante and Joe Gonzalez. And we were drinking. And we went to something Crow. And we have a few drinks. And there's 3 women sitting next to us. And one of them starts dancing in her chair. So I started dancing along. And then we laughed. And then a conversation happened. And the 3 of us all started talking to each other. But when they first started talking to me, they were speaking. And I was like, what? What are you saying? What? I could not for the life of me understand a word that they were saying. And then in my brain, it went like, I swear it went, they're Irish. And then I could understand every word that they were saying. It was like my brain couldn't figure out what was happening there. So it was employing like the wrong model to interpret the language that's coming out. And then once it realized the correct model to use, it shifted them and then I could understand what was happening.
That's really funny.
Like instantly, I went, they're Irish. Bang. And I had it. Like it was wild. So that's cool that they did. I mean, unless they've had an experience like that themselves, that's cool that an experience like that emerges in the art organically.
Yeah. It's really cool. And Spider-Punk is a very unique take on the Spider-Man archetype because the entire character is like, he's an anarchist and he's a legit guitarist and all these kinds of things that are like at first you're like, this seems weird, but then like when you start thinking about it, it makes sense as a character. Like in the world, it's like a fascist, state. In fact, effectively, they don't get into it at all in this movie, but in the comic books, they've explored it a little bit. So it like fleshed out some parts of this. But I will say, Jordan, to kind of iterate on what you were saying, his art style though, they actually pulled from punk rock. They did a collage style, and they actually came up with a special way to animate the character so that every frame they see him, it's like different collages. And this is me jumping forward, but when they're in the Spider Society, he's changing colors every other frame, where it's like some colors are like orange, and then it goes to like black and white, and then like blue or whatever. So, and it's like he's animated a different frame rate on top of all of that. So they like really played with this character to just be like, yeah, he's Spider-Punk and he's collage. Like I'm sure Nate would love this character.
Oh, for sure.
Collage a feature of punk aesthetic already?
Yes.
Yeah, like collage art. So it's so
that's
dope.
cool because that's what they're doing is they're breaking forms.
Yeah,
like throwing a beer bottle and watching it shatter. It's the same thing with the artwork because they're punk trying to break it all.
Yep.
So of course it organically emerges as collage and then that carries over.
And that's why also too in Spider Society, he's stealing a bunch of little bits and pieces of tech. And Miles is like, what are you doing? And he's like, don't worry. He's like, you might come in handy. Don't worry about it. Like, they're not going to miss it. Yeah. He's just smooth and just up to no good all the time.
Something interesting too. And Nate, a lot of his cover art. And then when we had our group, he used collage art because it had like that punk aesthetic. So it was like, but dude, that character was dope. I forgot I saw something. It took him like X amount, like a obscene amount of time to like create that character alone and to like really nail him. And the part that was dope is I think is how different parts of his body moved at different rates. So he was just like all just obstruction of everything. Just like so
just all over the
unconventional.
place. And I bet like the artist who had to work on that guy probably hates his life because he's just like, this fucking blows. And it's probably janky up until the 9th hour.
For sure.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, they really took the fracturing thing to it. So, I mean, I don't know how you go much further than that. I mean, then
I
you
don't
have,
think you could.
it's almost like the whole aesthetic of the film is already so chaotic and all over the place that in order to introduce a character who's supposed to be chaotic in comparison to the norm of chaos, it was difficult. So they have to create somebody who's, like you said, body part is even at different brain rates here. So it's like they have to be broken up even more so than the way that this multiverse is broken up.
Mm-hmm.
And they did it's very creative ways of taking that as far as you can.
Yeah.
Anything else to say about the India scenes? I mean, the biggest thing is that he saves the police officer, and then chaos ensues.
That's what they've done. They've spawned the org? What's it called? Canon
event. They broke the canon. And we don't know. I guess the other thing is like you don't know what was broken in the beginning of this. Like you find out shortly after, like, and clearly Miguel is going to the principal's office, or not Miguel, Jesus. Miles is going to the principal's office because he's breaking things that he's not supposed to be breaking, or doesn't know that he's breaking them.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is just where I think it's important to say this is when they finally start establishing really the rules that this multiverse needs to play by. Right. And it's like, you have these things that are supposed to happen. Miles isn't supposed to be here. And that's the first time you say like, oh, okay, Miles showing up here. Fuck this up. And then, moving forward, we figure out why. But, that's when I was like, okay, this is different than the first one. Right. But also different than other multiverse stuff. Cause to me, I felt like there was real consequence where not a complaint on this movie, but if we think of like No Way Home, still phenomenal. But when Doctor Strange was freaking out about the multiverse stuff, it just seemed kind of like, all right, it'll probably be fine. You know what I mean? Like the stakes didn't seem as like dire, I guess.
I think that too, the foundation is important here. Like because once Miles goes to the Spider Society and Miguel is explaining what happened, one of the first things they say is, by the way, that spider that bit you wasn't from your world. So like they established it, like Miles's origin is rooted in multiverses existing, right? Like it's not just some random, super abstract idea that they just kind of make work. Like we figured out a way with magical technology to open portals. Like they kind of make it an accident initially, and then they add this portal stuff in afterwards because they know it exists. So that like in the context of the world that they're writing, because it was an accident for the first time, that means you can purposely do it later once you understand it. So it's not like it's just this, I don't know, abstract idea that loses itself on its own because it just spins off into crazy town if you let it do its own thing, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that because it explains a lot to me. Like I looked at it as, okay, so that makes sense why that his Peter Parker, his Spider-Man in his world, because there already was one. So it's saying like they didn't need another. So then by you showing up is the reason that he had to die. Right. And this is not in the first one. Right. Just by him showing up, because then there was a world that didn't have a Spider-Man. You know what I mean?
I think it's wrong. I think the premise of that is wrong because the Miguel doesn't know that Peter was already going to die prior, like because of the exploding of the reactor in the first film, and that spider doesn't show up until after, like the whole chaos of the aftermath of the exploding of that reactor, and so that spider wasn't technically in Miles's universe until after the fact. So it wasn't technically Miles's fault that Peter died. Or like it should have broken canon beforehand. Like if Spider-Man died and it wasn't supposed to happen, that world should just cease to exist. So I think Miguel's premise about canon events is off.
Yes, for sure. For sure. I think they mentioned that at the end of this one, that he has it wrong with Gwen's situation.
And we'll get toward the end. There's another reason why he's wrong too.
Yeah.
With the other world.
But didn't Miles get bit before Peter?
Not in the very beginning. That was it when he was doing the artwork with Uncle Aaron. He's doing like that graffiti, and then he bites his hand, and he's like, and then he just slaps it off his wrist.
Right.
So it's way far away from the reactor event from the intro of the film.
Gotcha.
Because the intro of that film opens up with him fighting the Green Goblin in the reactor area.
I gotta rewatch that.
Yeah, I did watch it before seeing this one, but now I can't remember. Could have sworn it happened before, but maybe not. I don't remember. But either way, I think you're right that Miguel his whole framework is wrong. Yeah, he's wrong.
Mm-hmm. I have other hypotheses, but we'll get there before. I don't want to spoil anything. I want to get a little bit further along.
Right.
Where else? I still think it was really cool that they did the film itself is actually broken up into chapters. You can see it because they use the comic book covers to signify the stage of the story they're in. They start out with the Gwen cover, then the Miles cover, and then I believe it goes to the Spider-Man Indie cover, and then in Act 4, it's Miguel's cover. And they do a short little intro, I'm Spider-Man 2099, and he's darker than any of the other characters that we see. And you can see it first in their eyes. Jordan, I know I explained some of this stuff to them, or to you about this. And there's another character, which we'll talk about, who has the same look in his eyes later on. And I'm sure of me just saying this, people might have already seen the photos that have been floating around the internet. But he's just different than any other Spider-Man we've seen up until this point, because most Spider-Man are kind of naively optimistic. We'll put it that way. And he's way more intense across the board and doesn't make any jokes. I guess that's that's another difference, right? Like Spider-Man's just quippy constantly, and he doesn't do it. But I still think they do a good job of setting the tone for this character and making him into like bad guy number 2, even though he's kind of supposed to be the good guy or the one who's manning the ship, I guess. And this is where I think the story turns a little bit like Captain America Civil War, where it's like Captain America versus Iron Man, because the whole premise of canon events is kind of like the thought experiment of, if you knew someone was going to commit a crime, could you stop them before they did it? Or would you have to wait until they actually committed the crime to actually arrest them or stop them? And in some sense, that's what I see this multiverse explaining of like the origins of the spider peoples, where all of these guys have very similar backgrounds. And when you start messing around their origin events or key moments in their lives that are supposed to happen, I'm going to put that in quotes, then all of a sudden the entire framework of what these characters are, or the entire worlds of which these people live, fall apart. And so that's where like the fundamental, I think, disagreement is where this movie is kind of laying out of like, even if you knew what would happen, would you still try to save the people you cared about most? Because in Miles' situation, it still seems that he's going to lose his dad. And so, or at least Spot is now the one who's going to target his dad because Miles didn't take him seriously. And so he's going to take away the thing that he loves most, or the people he loves most. So he has nothing.
Yeah. Real quick, I want to comment on Miguel, and then we'll go back to that. But they tell you in the movie several times that this is not a good dude. Like they straight up just say it. Like in that opening, the cold open, when Vulture goes out and he's trying to stop him, like the police fly up to him and he's like, "I'm the good guy, I swear." And they're like, "You don't look like a good guy." And then in the scene with Miles and Gwen, they're swinging, and she says something. They're talking
Vampire
about
dude or
Miguel,
something.
right? Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, and Miles says like that doesn't sound like a good guy or something like that. And even more after the fact, they just keep repeatedly saying there's something off with this person. So, it'll be interesting exactly what it is, but we'll get into the theories later.
Yes.
But yeah, it's just this guy is obsessed with control, I guess. And I guess that's where Iron Man's kind of philosophy would be in Civil War,
Mhm.
right? I think he was the one who was more like order, where Captain America was more like the anarchist in that sense. I think, if I remember that right.
Well, Captain America was more of like you still have to let people choose, regardless of whether or not you know the outcome. Like even if you had prescience and said, like I know Joe is going to commit some sort of crime, you still have to give that person the agency to make that mistake of their own free will before you can make any sort of action against that person. Otherwise, you're impinging upon the freedoms of that individual. Whereas Iron Man in the scenario I laid out, he was more about the authoritarian of like kind of like the big brother aspect of like, no, you have to, clamp down at anything. It's kind of you see this sometimes within like the AI stuff with the divergence like idea where like when you find people who are divergent individuals, it's like you put those people in a box because they'll just feed into civil unrest and you make sure they don't do what they're going to do to society.
Right. Right. So, but the parallel would be Miguel was
Yes.
kind of siding on the Iron Man side, I guess.
Yeah, he's Iron Man in this situation because he's the means justify the end,
right.
or the ends
Right.
justify the means. Sorry.
And it's funny because, and it doesn't seem like a plot hole. It seems like this guy's just obsessed and can't see past his nose. But him saying Miles is an anomaly and he, the original one, but it's like, but his universe is still intact. So if the rules you're playing by are saying that things would collapse, doesn't that mean that this was supposed to happen? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like right there, but he can't see it, right? Because he's so obsessed.
Yeah, he already has his like predetermined thing that Miles is the problem. Like he's the reason all of this failed or whatever. But at the same time, I think it's like he's so jaded from like seeing his own world collapse or the world he stepped into collapse that he's just traumatized, I guess, is the best way to describe it. And it's it's almost like you can't and maybe I'm sure they'll flesh this out with the third part but like you're probably going to learn more about why he is the way that he is instead of this like single-minded thing of like we need to just lock Miles up or get him home so he doesn't unravel things further.
No.
I thought he was one of the, I hate to say it, but I think he was one of the least interesting characters for me. Like after talking about the Spot and then I think of the other people, this guy feels a little generic.
Yes.
Now that will change in the next movie and that they're just introducing him in a generic way. But the real focus here is on the ascension of Spot as this ultimate bad guy for the next film. But I don't know. I thought I have very little to say, I think, about him. There's nothing that is particularly interesting, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I think most of the sequence was mostly to show off a lot of the other different variants of Spider-Man. And not to say that that takes anything away, but I think it was just, hey, artists, have fun.
It took him 4 years for this scene. So
did it really?
4 years for this scene. Yeah.
That's crazy.
The whole chase scene. I mean, it was fun, dude. It was just like wow.
It's a long sequence, honestly.
Yeah. I was just like, how cool is, I don't know. I was just like, yo, you have Spider-Man being chased by like hundreds of other Spider-Men. I was just like, that's tight. Like, I don't know. Like, this shit was just fun.
Yeah.
It's cool.
It's cool. I wonder if they just had that one artist per like Spider-Man. Like you could just, I mean, maybe or at least 10 per artist. I don't know how they would do it. Nobody has to be in communication with each other at all. The fact that they're totally disjointed.
You're right.
Like,
yeah.
That's
totally fine. So you have complete freedom to create as many ridiculous versions of Spider-Man as you like.
Yep.
That's hilarious.
Even though
I wonder if Ed didn't make the cut. Like we're like That's a bit much.
Yo, that would suck because I'm like, yo,
Huh.
you have a spider pig. You're not gonna pick mine. I'm like,
I mean, they
like,
had Spider Cat, like legitimately,
freaking T-Rex
and I mean,
spider.
the Spider Rex too. On top of all of that, like,
Yeah.
I feel like once you go to fucking dinosaurs, you can't really get any more wild.
Right. That'd be funny though.
I think, and the other one too, like the cameo, they did some cameos. I thought in the sequence that was cool, like seeing Donald Glover, even with the live action things of showing the canon events with the original Sony trilogy and the Amazing Spider-Man films to kind of just, establish it within the context of the world. What was the last one? Oh, they also had the Metro Boomin, who produced the soundtrack for this, had a cameo of his character.
No
Or
shit.
a spiderized version. He's the one who said he's got nowhere to go, and then he jumps out the window. That's Metro Boomin Spider-Man.
I didn't realize that. Dope. That's
Yeah. So they did a lot of homages to people in this one. Just just had fun with art. Effectively, it's very comic booky, if that makes sense.
yeah.
And then you also see kind of fracturing. I think because everyone's trying to convince Miles, right? Like this is kind of going back to the coming age story and like leaving your mark on the world or doing what you think is right. And this is kind of getting back to where, like, how does Miles get out of this situation, or like, how does the plot move forward, right? It's because it's really at this point, it's either Miles gets captured or he escapes. Those are really the only two options. And you have probably talk about Peter B. Parker a little bit if you guys are interested or have anything to say, because now he's a dad who is the mentor in the first film.
Yeah.
They kind of humiliated him a little bit.
I've heard
Mhm.
some of that, and I agree after watching it a second time.
Terrible, but it's definitely there a little bit. He's just
Yes.
he's kind of the butt of the joke.
I feel like that was his role in the first one too. But I don't know. I got what you're putting down that I was like, when I was watching, I was like, I wanted him to be a little more, I don't know, badass is a word, but I don't
Yeah.
know. Something rubbed me a little off, and I was like
the cool dad. He wasn't
Yeah.
the cool dad to me. He was just like, I don't know.
He's kind of washed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's-
Yeah.
He's washed up in a way that you would have hoped the first movie, he's washed up because he's depressed or whatever.
Mhm.
And then he has this whole character arc, and ostensibly he goes and puts his life together, except he's still washed up. And isn't this supposed to be like our version of Peter Parker, like the Peter Parker, as far as we kind of know him? So there's
It
this
should be.
circumstance
Yeah.
where,
Oh, that one died, I think. That's the one that
Or
died
would it
in
be the
first
ones
one.
in Miles?
Yeah.
meaning not the one that dies because of Miles, but that he's just kind of the representation of the classic Peter Parker.
Got you.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
In the movie. So they take the classic Peter Parker, the one from the original comic books and all this, as far as we know him, as far as we're concerned, and they wash him up, they humiliate him, and they replace him. It's like, I don't need more of this. This feels too close again to this bait and switch bullshit that's going around, where there's this intent to, like, why are we humiliating Loki before we get rid of him? Why do we have to do it to Luke Skywalker? Why do we have to do it to the whole Lord of the Rings? Every one of these, we just keep playing this game. At a certain point, I'm tired. Can you just can you show some respect to the original, to the thing that gave you the opportunity to make this cool version? Right? Why do we have to denigrate the past all of it? Can we be cool with this, please?
That's interesting. That's interesting because I felt something. I don't know if it was that, but I feel like it seems like everyone felt something off with Peter B. Which I think that was intentional. Like there's Peter A, right? Like the A version.
Yeah,
and then
I didn't
the
even
B
think about
version.
that.
So that's what I thought it was an intentional. It wasn't our Peter, because I took it as that our version died and Miles is replacing him.
I see what you're saying.
That's how I took it in the first one, and this one wasn't him, but it's the closest to him. But it's like that version that died. I saw online somewhere people were saying that was like the perfect Spider-Man, and that was who we would like look at as all the original, the OG. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But but I get what you're saying too, because if that's who we relate mostly closely to, that it just seemed like his character wasn't really needed. He didn't really, if he wasn't there,
It didn't
I don't
change
think
much.
anything would change in the story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like he was kind of, when you mentioned earlier how like none of the side characters like felt like just plot device. He kind of felt like plot device, but there was
Yeah.
not even a device. You know what I mean?
He wasn't really even like, he was there to have that like that heart to heart moment in like
Yeah.
the middle of the chase scene, but it didn't do anything other than slow things down for a little bit.
Right.
But outside of that, like you could have deleted that part and you would not have really missed a beat.
Yeah. So I'm curious what they'll do in the next one with him. I don't think you can get away with doing that twice, right?
Yes.
I think if it's like, okay, this is the setup for the third, there'll be payoff on everything, then I'll be cool with it. But as it stands, I feel you. I feel like everyone's in the same boat where it's like something isn't quite right with his.
They gotta rewrite that a little bit better.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Especially, I don't know, for me it's like if you're staying true to how Mary Jane is written, she's a badass. And so the idea that she's not like gonna be cool with you taking a infant to superhero things is insane to me.
Yeah.
Like
Would let?
she wouldn't, not even close.
Oh yeah.
There's no freaking way.
Yeah.
And it's also too, it's like, how can you make Spider-Man that careless when he's literally predicated on the idea of responsibility and protecting those he cares most? You telling me he's okay with bringing his child into life or death situations? Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
And that's honestly the biggest gripe I have with this whole multiverse Spider-Man plot. Because if all of these characters are fundamentally built on the same core identity, all of them believing in Miguel and saying that Miles is the problem is wrong fundamentally, because Spider-Man does not play well with others. He is fundamentally anti-team from his inception. And on top of that, Spider-Man is also a loner. So for everyone to agree with Miguel, either is everyone's afraid of Miguel, or they're just cool with going along with it because he's given them enough to go on. But Spider-Man is someone who bucks every trend. So the fact there's only like 5 Spider-Man that are cool with, like, you would think the flip would script. Like, or sorry, what the hell did I just say? The script would flip in this situation that more Spider-Man would agree with Miles than they would agree with Miguel. Fundamentally. From an understanding of the character. But I get it, like, as a plot device, it's super minor. It's only someone who's really, really, really gets Spider-Man is going to really, like, be annoyed. Like, this is like comic book talk. Like, this is nerdy kids who talk at the comic book shop about things that annoy them. And this is why the Spider-Verse stuff gets fucking annoying. Because it waters down what makes the character compelling. Because it turns all spider people into autonoma that can't make real decisions. Because they have to listen to a leader. When Spider-Man doesn't listen to anyone but his own intuition.
I think your gripe is to go deeper on that, because I think you're hitting something, but I think the gripe is more on narrative and how story works than it is with the Spider-Verse. Because if you go and you say, like, okay, Spider-Man historically works like this, right? And so how this would work is that most would side with Miles. Then we'd have no story. Right? You know, like that'd be like, okay, there's nothing really interesting here. So I think for the sake of the stakes and the story, you kind of had to be like, okay, we're going to have these individual spider people who do exemplify that, what you're getting at, who are that true Spider-Man. And so the irony is them saying Miles isn't, but he's the forefront of doing what you're saying. I think is they're getting at what you mean, but I get what you're saying, where it's like, that doesn't make sense. But then it'd be like, well, hey, don't do that. And they're like, like, it would just end.
And I think what's cool here is it's not per se Miles. It's because like Miles is already on the outside. Miles is the loner. Miles is the one that quote unquote doesn't fit in. He's the outcast, right? Spider-Man is fundamentally an outcast character. And so the entire up until this point where Miles is like, oh, I need to go do my own thing and just figure this out and save my family. And stop the Spot. And at first it's like Gwen falls into the Spider Society and thinks this is her higher purpose. Then she can reconnects with Miles and realizes, wait, something's off. And then she's like trying to stop Miles, not only in Mumbattan, but also in she grabs him in Spider Society as well. And he's like, sorry, Gwen, can't do it. Like you've broken some trust here, regardless of, whatever bond we have. And like she's slowly realizing like the error of this thing, like that sometimes you join a group or you think you're like aiming for something that's bigger than yourself, but it's filling a void in you, not because it's actually the right thing to do, but because it feels like it's meaningful to you. Like it's a false hope or false promise. And it's like like when you really ask yourself, like, this is actually not what you want to do, because deep down it's not the right thing to do. So it's like, and then like this is the other part of the problem, is because we know this is a part 2, it makes it difficult to get real sense of closure, because this is a lot of setup to like set the stage for all these things that are going to get closure in part 3. So it's like hard to say like what exactly all this means in the bigger scope of things.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting hearing it from the perspective of someone who is like a lifelong deep fan. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is
it
really
wasn't
cool.
even intentional that my shaker cup was Spider-Man before we started recording.
What's the shirt you're wearing? I've been looking at that.
I thought that was a
$20.99.
Spider shirt too. Yeah. Oh, it is. That's hilarious.
This was intentional. I did that on purpose.
I should have worn my full leotard. I have
the cosplay suit with the eyes that move and everything.
I feel like that's, if you're gonna cosplay and you do Spider-Man, that's like you can't. There are too many Spider-Mans already. That's like the deep. I don't know what I want to cosplay, so I'm gonna put this on.
The only way I could ever cosplay Spider-Man is like, I gotta have a 6-pack. There's no way I'm gonna put on a skin tight suit with a little bit of fluff.
Really, you can be Peter B. You're good. You're good.
I'll just wear slippers and
yeah.
So I'm the ideal Spider-Man in that there's so little crime that I have a belly. I've done such a good job.
You've solved crime forever.
Yeah.
It's not a
I can chill now. That's so funny.
Oh, it's great. Man, we've lingered on the Spider Society part so long because I had so much to say. This is why I needed you guys to be here, because I would have just rambled into endless. But did you
kept talking so much and then started talking so fast that you just opened up a hole inside yourself, fell into yourself, and became hot?
There we go.
Oh my god.
Gone forever.
Oh my god.
Did you guys expect like the twist with Miles going home?
No. It took me a second to like be like, oh. Like it was, I feel like I literally said that. It was like 3 moments of oh shit.
The first time it like hit me was like when his mom started acting weird, and I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And then when Uncle Aaron opens the door, and I'm like,
see, I didn't catch it until he walked in. I thought they were trying to be funny, like she just had no idea who Spider-Man was. I thought they were gonna be like, yeah, you're not that important. That's what I thought they were doing. I'm like, oh, this is a weird take on him revealing who he is. Like, oh, are they trying to say it doesn't matter? Interesting. And then when Uncle Aaron walked in,
his mom says like, you took out your dreads.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's what happened for me. It's like, I'm with you, Jordan, the whole time, where it's like, okay, well, maybe his mom's just not clued in. Like, she's not paying attention. That's kind of funny. But then it was right the moment to like, you took out your dreads. And he's like, what? I'm like, nope, it's off. Something's off.
Red flag.
And then, right.
Yeah. But it was like, oh shit. okay. But I love that. I loved how they
So
fucking
good.
shot that, dude. How like they make it look like they're watching him. They all know where he is, and then Gwen is in his room and he's not in there. I was just like, yo,
Mm.
that's some good storytelling right there.
And it's cool because like you're getting like this like mirror of things, right? Like because Gwen gets kicked out. This is but she we kind of skipped the small scene in between here, which is I guess it's kind of like intermixed with all of this, where Miles gets sent back to Earth 42, which is where the spider's from. Gwen gets sent back to her world because Miguel's like, I'm tired of you and, bringing Miles into this kind of thing. And this is like where Gwen kind of has that, like the confrontation that needed to happen from the very beginning with her father. And it's like the first time that they're in sync. And like, I just love the way they chose to do this with the watercolors. It's just so cool. I just love the heart in it. And you see like when they come together and her dad is like, I've stopped, I'm done being a cop, right? Like I'm just going to be dad now. And when they hug, the colors turn all white and they start to finally blend for the first time in it's really the second time, but this is the first time where it's like equilibrium, where they find the balance within their like relationship, where they're actually seeing each other for who they are, or for each other, and what they're actually, like you said, Jordan, from the very beginning, they're aiming at the same thing.
Yeah. And now they're in line, and the plot part of this that is really cool is because she saw what can happen. Like when Miguel's trying to say, "Oh, the cop, whoever needs to die, or else it breaks the canon," but she saw for herself. She's like, "Oh, wait, that means." I think she even says, "She's like, that means," and like kind of her voice trails off.
Yeah, it could be her own dad. It could die too at some point.
Yeah. Well, I think she's saying that since he's not a cop anymore,
yes,
she's safe from that happening.
He changed the canon in that sense,
which means that he can be saved. And so she's like, "Oh, Miles is right." And I was like, "Oh, dope." They just showed, but the way they set that up was perfect because that was set up at the beginning. You know what I mean? They didn't have to like backtrack and have this whole expositional moment between them. It was like it wasn't too much talking. It was just feeling and colors and just pure emotion that they set up at the beginning. And I was like, they can get the plot, they get the emotion, you get what's happening, and they don't have to linger. I'm like, dude, they're great. They told the story.
It spent as much time as it needed, which you're totally right about. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really dope.
Yep. And then it also pays off with Hobie because he leaves behind the makeshift watch that he stole all those components to make. And he's like, on the note, it says, just in case it doesn't work out. It's like he knew, or he had a suspicion because something about not liking authority figures as a punk rocker.
So dope. His character was so tight. I hope they do like a spin-off of his. I really do. That'd be sick.
But then it goes back to her confronting Miles's parents after getting rid of Scarlet Spider, who is voiced by none other than the infamous Nicolas Cage.
Right. That was funny. It's
so ridiculous.
Little monologue.
And apparently, I don't know if you guys caught this. I think, Jordan, you actually sent this to me. There's multiple versions of the film. I don't know exactly what is changing between each of the versions of the film, but there's like slight dialogue changes.
Yeah. It's just like a few dialogue things. Nothing major. I don't know the purpose of that. It might have just been like edits or something. Yeah. Like.
So you're telling me that there are multiple different versions you could come across?
Yeah.
Like if I go to one theater in California and then I go to another in Illinois, they're different movies.
There's a chance. Yeah.
But like
that's intentional.
That's 100% intentional.
Yeah,
that's thematic.
Yeah, like the core story is all the same. It's just like
one-off dialogue,
slight variation.
Yeah,
that's definitely that was an intentional artistic move for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting though. It would have been cool if they actually did it though, where the plot was different, like the twist at the end. If it was like someone else, and then people are discussing it, and it's like that's not what happened. You know what I mean? Like that's
right, because then nobody would believe each other because no, what do you mean? I saw this version of the film.
Right.
That'd be so funny.
That'd be cool.
But yeah, and then I guess the biggest shocking like revelation of this entire film is Miles thinks the Prowler is Uncle Aaron this whole time in the alternate universe of his, or at least where the spider is from. And he's knocked out unconscious and tied to a punching bag. And I just love the sound design that they chose to do for Uncle Aaron and the Prowler. That like, I don't even know how you describe it. It's like electro, like deep bassy, but like scary at the same, like it's almost horror. Like screeching. It's so cool. It's so good. And it's really captures the intention of, or like the threat of the Prowler. And you realize the Prowler is not Uncle Aaron. And you see the mask come off and it's Miles. And I knew where it was going as soon as like he said it wasn't going to be that, or that he wasn't Prowler. But I just thought it was such a cool payoff, because I think this is where like multiverse really is cool, because it's kind of playing that game of like, hey, sometimes the smallest things that happen to you or the smallest decisions you make shape the trajectory of your life. Which I also should say too, that he looks up and sees that same mural on the wall. In Miles's reality, it's Uncle Aaron who's commemorated. But in the alternate reality, it's his dad.
No. Yeah, I mean, that shit was dope. I was getting so mad because I'm like, I know it's ending right here.
You could feel it?
Yeah, and I was like, but I was just like, this next movie is gonna be insane. Like, you can just tell. But I loved it. I had no issues with the twist. I was like, this, I don't know, what a way to close out a part 2.
Yes. I think it's such a cool concept, because my thinking is this. So this is the speculation part. Because if Miles is, you know, like the spirit of Spider-Man, as like we would hope him to be, even though he sees this broken version of himself, or this alternate version of himself that's already lost his dad, who's basically a criminal, he's still going to realize that he could be that variant of himself, but that also means there could be still good in the criminal version of himself. Right? And on top of that, this also plays into my hypothesis about Miguel, because he says he's different than all the other Spider-Man in that like short little intro sequence where he's like, I don't like the things that I do. And everyone says he's like a vampire and stuff. And he's like, you have claws. And I think, I can't confirm this, but in most of the scenes where Miguel is there in like combat situations, the musical motif sounds super similar to the Prowler. So I think in the future, or in the 2099 version, he is injecting himself with some sort of Prowler serum. And so that's going to be one of the revelations in part 3, is that Miguel is like a spiritual successor. Even though he's a Spider-Man, he's actually a Prowler. Yeah. Which pulls it all together from the very beginning, because the Prowler is like the capstone villain, or this like the revelation from part 1 that brings it all the way through to tie this story into a neat bow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's confronting the shadow at multiple levels. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I think you're probably right. I bet that's what happens.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this a lot.
That'll be dope.
Waking up in the middle of the night sweating. Oh, I've got the answer.
I know who the Prowler is.
Little do you know, is like behind me there's a cork board with a whole bunch of notes, and
you're that one guy who retired 10 years ago, but he can't let go of that particular case. It's like, back to bed, please.
Where is he?
Like, thank God you're not married right now, dude, because your wife would be like, shut up, go to bed. Like, go to bed. Oh my God.
Needless to say, I like Spider-Man.
Couldn't tell.
Joe, your face.
One thing we didn't
Yes.
touch on this, and that's a shame because what I loved most about this movie was how they used music. The way they integrated the soundtrack, right, which is dope, and like implemented it with the score, right, to like set the tone in different moments. Like Gwen, they had that one song that just fit the emotion so well. Which is hilarious. Wenzel, you texted me and said you loved this song, and the artist who made it is Coi Leray. Never in
Dude,
a
she's
million.
great.
Yeah, never did. That sentence is crazy. Never in a million years would I thought you listened to Coi Leray. Like her initial style of music is so opposite than the music you listen to, and I'm like, see, now we're
Dude,
doing
her
something
voice
cool
is
here.
amazing. I love her voice.
She's dope. She's awesome, but it's like she has that stigma of being like this new age rap. That's like, you know what I mean? You don't want to listen to it, right? But now you're exposed to it in a different lens, and now that's opening a gate a little bit to be like, oh, she's really talented. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And so I thought that was so cool. I couldn't believe he texted me that. I was like, oh, I'd never thought I'd see that. But
You're gonna do a double take. You're like, what the hell?
yeah, it's so cool.
You're in the multiverse right now, Jordan. You pop into a different universe because
Right.
your normal one. That shit never would have happened.
Yeah, I was like, this is not canon at all, dude. I had to call up Miguel real quick. It's crazy.
I mean, I am the proud owner of Air Force or Air Jordans for the first time ever because of Spider-Man.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
It's happening. This begins. Wait.
Wenzel's changing, bro. He's gonna start fucking braiding his hair.
Well, we're set.
Yeah.
What's the new? What's the last movie comes out? I'm gonna have dreads like Miles.
Yeah. Like,
Oh,
dude,
we good.
hey, Wenzel, chill out, bro. Oh my god. But with the music specifically in the last, like when Miles goes back in that last like 30 minutes and how they kind of build up with the score and then they cut it when it like gets intense, right? When there's like a plot
Mhm.
moment where Gwen reconciles with her dad, they cut the music, and then right when he gets back to like, all right, we got to save Miles type shit, and then the fucking like up tempo music scales up, and then when you get to the very end, when they reveal who the Prowler is, Miles is, you know, about to face himself, and the music's just like so big, right? And I was like, yo, the way they built that is amazing.
Oh yeah.
Is so good. So
Like,
I feel like I have to.
I feel
credit
like
the
that's
music.
one thing that people like slept on, even with the first film, is like people think of Sony as like this kind of electronics company and a few other things, but people don't realize that like Sony is like this giant behemoth that fires on so many cylinders, and like they can take this like multimedia like juggernaut that is this animation film effectively, but at the same time they have Sony like Studios, which does all the music producing, and so they can basically get all these artists and just be like, all right guys, we got this sick film and here are the scenes that we want you to make a score for, and they can be working with the artists, be working in the studio, and just hammer these things out and just make things that just lock together in this really cool way that it's like I think it's easy to overlook because you don't realize, because it's just there, so you take it for granted.
Yeah. 100%.
Dope. It's so cool for me. I love like the like how they like craft it, but also like it matches like the emotional tempo of what's going on screen at the same time.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, Sony was flexing on this for sure.
Oh, they
They were
knew
like-
what they had. Like nobody realized. Like I feel like the original film kind of slept at the box office. Nobody really cared. It was kind of like, this is just another thing, and like people thought it was dope. But it wasn't until like it went on to like DVD or streaming that people were like, wait a minute, this is something different.
Yeah.
Like we haven't seen something like this before.
Yeah.
And then here we are 5 years later, and everyone's like, holy crap. They really like they like upped themselves and then a little bit more. And like even I think the one thing I do remember people saying early on when like the trailers were first coming out or like the announcements is that people were worried about, because the original title was like part 1 in it.
Mhm.
And this is something that Dune I think did smart too, where they realized that in the box office when things say part 1, it scares people away from going to see a film. Typically. And so at some point along the line they removed the part 1 from the title of this film, and then almost everyone in the theater, when it said to be continued or to be concluded, everyone's like, like it like freaked out. Like I don't know if you guys had that experience when you were in the theater, but like everyone went kind of bananas. Like, how could they leave it at that? Like, it's because it was crazy. Because Gwen. It started with Gwen leaving her band to her forming her band again. Her band
Right.
to go save Miles.
Yeah. That didn't happen in mine. I did see it twice back to back. I saw it Saturday and Sunday, like a couple weeks ago.
Damn, dude.
Yeah, because I saw it solo, and then Alex was like, "I want to see it," and I was like, "I didn't think you'd want to see that." She's like, "I want to see it," so I'm like, "Okay, let's go." So we saw it again.
Twist my arm.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I saw it like 2, maybe 3 weeks after release. Right.
Okay, yeah.
People were clapping. That's like an opening night thing.
Yeah,
You know what
that's
I
for
mean?
sure opening night thing.
Like, and the theater was full. It was a full theater, and people were clapping. And I was like, "That's how you know it's good." Like, you know what I mean? I'm like, I've never seen that in any other movie before. So I was like, that
Yeah, that's crazy.
they did it.
I'm trying to think of the last movie that I heard people do like an ovation for. Huh. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I think there was some happiness after No Way Home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one was. There was a lot of emotions in that one.
Yeah. That's probably, I think that might still be my favorite Marvel. I think.
Yeah. Say that or Endgame, but I'm with you.
Yeah. And they are able to do multiverse with stakes in that. Like they find a way, and it's about when it's making it personal. See, that's another part of this trend I'm talking about. Where in all the chaos, you return to the people you love.
No.
Like that. That's how you do the stories. That's how you. That's the door out of the chaos of the multiverse, and our present moment in the culture. Part of why I like that.
You mean
the chaos of the?
You mean
needs to be established on the relationship.
Anchor yourself in the relationships that matter most to you.
Yeah. You think we would remember that shit? When we where we fuck this one.
As a common refrain that we've been saying off the air, people like to make things complicated.
Yes, they do.
Well, any other thoughts? I feel like we've covered a lot of ground in a really fast amount of time. It's only been an hour and a half, but I feel we did a good job here. Anything else?
Yeah.
No. I'm excited for the next one.
Yeah, I know. The sad part is it, as of yesterday, it officially got delayed by Sony.
It's unfortunate.
Another 3 years. I think it's like 2026. So, but that is also because it also came out that they crunched their artists, like over 100 artists or something got hired on in like the last year to crunch out the film, and then all got let go. And as soon as people found out about that, they were like, yeah, you got to figure out how to do better than that.
I feel like that's how the industry works. When the movie's over, you're out of a job until the next movie. But I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mystery and a conundrum to how to manage crunch, because I feel like in any creative project, no matter how well it's managed, there's always going to be crunch at some point.
Right.
But that is a discussion for another day. In other words, go watch Spider-Verse once it's available for people. I don't know, is it still in the theaters? I feel like it might be. But
yeah, for sure.
But in any case, it was a dope one. Totally worth it. Refreshing, I think, across the board, especially in a world where the superhero genre feels to be stagnating. For some reason, Spider-Man seems to be one of the few that continues to get it right. I'm not sure exactly what it is about Spider-Man that people are able to write well. It's an interesting one in comparison to the rest of the superheroes that are popular right now.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Until next time, everybody.
Bye.
Boom. All right, everyone. Thank you all for making it through today's episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I was really excited to talk about this, as you should probably be able to pick up throughout the conversation. I had thought about where the story's going. I had thought about the different characters, and just in general, what Spider-Man as a character means. And especially in a broader context, considering there's now, two main characters, really, outside of Peter Parker. So, if you're interested in this podcast, You can follow us on Spotify, Apple, you name it, all of the podcast platforms. You can follow us on YouTube, and you can also subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/feedingcuriosity, or you can head over to our website and find even more. See you all in the next episode.